welcome to EVTN News. Today, I have a few news stories here, actually off of Twitter, sort of. I get news stories a bunch of different places, but we'll start at China. So, the Vatican's Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin has confirmed to LifeSite News that the Holy See intends to renew its secretive deal with Communist China later this year. In an email exchange, Parolin affirmed that the highly controversial deal affirmed. This is really difficult. Okay. Parolin affirmed that the highly controversial deal that the Holy See has with communist authorities in Beijing is set for renewal this autumn. The officially secret deal is believed to recognize the state-approved church in China and allows the Chinese Communist Party to appoint bishops. The Pope apparently maintains veto power, although in practice it is the CCP that has control. It also allegedly allows for the removal of legitimate bishops to be replaced by Chinese Communist Party approved bishops. So, yeah. And that's pretty unprecedented. And other totalitarian governments may take note. I guess we'll see. Speaking at a rally promoting abortion in Florida on April 23rd, Joe Biden made the sign of the cross. He was listening to Florida Democratic Party Chair Nikki Fried, denounce Republican Governor Ron DeSantis' stance on banning abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. So he made the sign of the cross in support of abortion. All right. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because he shouldn't be denied communion. Yeah. Right? Because no one should be denied communion. Come to the table of plenty. Okay, so this was an interesting scenario. So, Catholic Answers created an AI bot. And they called him Father Justin. And so apparently someone asked for confession and absolution, and he gave it to them through AI. I mean, obviously this is artificial intelligence, so not real. And you can't absolve someone from their sins over a live chat, right? I mean, it's kind of weird, but anyway, some of the leftists were taunting this as well. Catholic Answers backtracked very quickly, and the AI person will be a layman. So I saw a comment by a modernist woman, one of the liberal heretics on Twitter, and she said, "Oh well, that's funny that they have a man. I wonder if it would be a woman. I wonder why they didn't think about using a woman as the face of their AI bot, or like a nun or something." And I said, well, there was a nun who taught theology, but you wouldn't have really liked her. Her name was Mother Angelica. And the bishops didn't really like her either. What does that say about the bishops? Speaking of bus nuns, Sister Natalie Beckhart, bus nun and undersecretary of the former Synod of Bishops, told the German newspaper Die Tagespost that there is currently no consensus on the introduction of a diaconate for women. Yeah, of course, because it's heretical. But she thinks it would be a possibility, and listen to this, to leave the diaconate of women to the individual bishops' conferences. So I think that was one of the goals all along. Last week I talked about an effort to introduce a ministry, a non-ordained ministry, so that women could essentially function as deacons. It was an effort by a German bishop, of course, and if the idea of ordaining women is left up to the individual bishops' conferences, of course you would see the Africans completely reject it. You would actually see most bishops' conferences not implement it at first, because I think there are a lot of them that actually support it, which is really disgusting and heretical, of course. But I think that so what is it, Germany? So German bishops would certainly implement it because they basically, some of them already have in their own dioceses. Belgium, potentially. And what about Switzerland? I think there's a little bit of a mixed bag, but I think you would see some, not very many, but you would see some implemented immediately. The United States would kind of drag their feet for a while, and this is all dependent on how long Francis is Pope. Because, and we've been saying this unfortunately for a while, is that if he dies, then there's a decent possibility that things get better. So I don't know. It's hard to really make long-term predictions because we know their goals, but we don't know if the modernist goals will be achieved or not. This would be a real schism. It'd be a schismatic act, and yeah. All right, so Slim Jim Martin, S.J., was very angry about protests at St. Louis University. There was a LMNOP mass, and there were protests. A group of people prayed the rosary outside in protest of the LMNOP mass. And James Martin, S.J., picked up on this. He said, "Imagine going to a valid and licit Catholic Mass and having other Catholics protest your presence there." Okay, so he's saying that the LMNOP Mass is valid and licit. So if you're only going to a Mass because it's valid and licit, that's bad. That's a bad reason to go. I hate to say it. Valid and licit. You're going to have to think outside the box here. If an LMNOP Mass is valid and licit, would you go to fulfill your obligation? Because apparently you can. Does it fulfill your obligation if you go to a priest who supports LMNOP? And I'm going to not comment on that question. I'm going to leave it open-ended for you to answer. What do you think? And there are certainly masses that are not licit. But are they pleasing to God? Are they more pleasing to God than an LMNOP Mass? Okay, let's move on to Bishop Strickland. Feel free to answer my questions if you wish. But moving on to Bishop Strickland, from a Twitter post he made, he said, "Almost 6 years ago I spoke at the USCCB meeting. I wasn't strong enough." So it's sort of like a self-reflective apology. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, it's a long one, but you can read it and let me know what you think. I'm going to read some clips because these are very interesting comments. He said, "In the years since that November day, we have seen our beautiful Catholic faith and the truth our Lord Jesus Christ suffered, died, and rose to reveal to us go undefended, mocked, and compromised. The litany of the gospel of wolves that has flowed out of the Vatican has gone unchecked over those 5+ years and has left many souls to wander in the darkness and to succumb to lies that destroy faith." Just very strong language from Bishop Strickland. very strong and forceful message. He said, to name a few, who demanded a real accounting of the McCarrick scandal and discipline for those who allowed his attacks on the faith, who spoke up when the Pachamama idol was paraded in St. Peter's Basilica, who resisted when fear of a disease allowed churches to be closed and sacraments to be denied, who demanded that our God-given free will must be respected when mandates were issued by too many leaders, who protested a synod on synodality that promoted an openness to blessing sin, who has said no to the ongoing attack on the liturgy, who has protested when faithful priests bold enough to speak the truth, bold enough to care more about the salvation of souls than keeping their position, have been canceled or silenced. Wow, I think that's the last one he's talking about himself. And this is the real crisis. This is the crisis. And Bishop Strickland, this is fantastic. I'm so excited. You know, maybe Bishop Strickland being fired was the best thing that could have happened, because now he is free to speak out without the fear of retribution. So this, it's lighting a fire under him. Maybe he always had that fire when he spoke out 5+ years ago. He always had that fire, but being removed maybe gave him a little bit, just a little extra boldness to speak out and speak the truth. Now, one thing that's interesting to note also, he is always permitted to speak at the USCCB meetings. He could go to the next one and speak if he wanted. I don't know that he will. I wonder if he thinks it's a waste of time. I wonder if they'll let him speak. That's a good question, because he always tried to speak at all the USCCB meetings, and eventually, I think they kind of started tuning him out. And they kind of started, what would you say, changing the roles so that he wouldn't be allowed to speak as much. Okay, so I'm switching, and this is very good. And and then the last story I have is another good story. So Ralph McLeod, who began leading the Catholic Campaign for Human Development in 2008, resigned earlier this month. USCCB spokesperson Chico Noguchi confirmed to the Pillar on last Monday. So Ralph McLeod, if you've been following the Lepanto Institute, you will know that Ralph McLeod was the campaign manager for pro-abortion Democrat Wendy Davis when she filibustered a pro-life bill at the Texas, I don't know if it was the Senate or the House, either or. She filibustered this pro-life bill, and she gained a lot of notoriety among bloodthirsty leftists. And so Ralph McLeod was her campaign manager. And then he got hired at the USCCB, the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, an abortion supporter, or at least presumably someone who worked for an abortion promoter. Wendy Davis bragged about her abortion. And Ralph McLeod worked for her. And then he got a job at the USCCB. According to several sources close to the USCCB, McLeod's resignation comes amid acute financial troubles for CCHD, which has reportedly dwindled its cash reserves by conferring grants beyond its own financial resources. One source close to the conference told the Pillar, CCHD is in a difficult situation because it's been giving out more grants than it takes in. It's becoming clear that's not sustainable. Wow. You understand basic math. And apparently Ralph McLeod does not. But they're very much, they were, if you look at Lepanto Institute's research, they were very much into the LMNOP Jesuit initiatives. And Michael Hitchborn, within probably the past year, he emailed the chairman of the USCCB with some of his findings, and they said, oh, we reviewed it, and there's no problems with any of the funding, and don't ever email us again. So this is, what would you say, vindication maybe for the Lepanto Institute. Just kind of every once in a while, you kind of need a positive story like this too. And it's sad that our positive stories are other people's downfalls, but it's got to happen. We gotta build it one brick at a time, right? But unfortunately, I don't know that the USCCB is going to learn from this. But hopefully, if the financial problems continue, then this program will be dissolved and they'll move on to something else. I mean, they're spending a decent bit of money on the Eucharistic revival, which it's just going to be a bunch of Novus Ordo, Eucharistic catechesis, I guess you would say. Which is, if you give people the option to receive the host and I hate to speak of it that way, but just to differentiate what I'm actually talking about, because they call the host the body and the wine the blood, even though both contain body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. And when you're presenting both to lay people and encouraging them to receive the cup as well as the host, then it's a drastic contrast to Eucharistic theology. When you're not going to instruct people why communion on the hand is bad, that's a problem. Eucharistic ministers are a real problem. But until they fix those problems, you're just going to continue to have the same lack of belief in the real presence and spending a bunch of money and inviting a bunch of diocesan employees from across the United States to come to a football stadium. I think it's a football stadium in Indianapolis. That's not going to solve any problems. It's just going to invite diocesan employees to a football stadium. That's all it's going to do. So I don't know. I think the intention is probably good. I mean, certainly bishops were blindsided. Some of them might not even believe in the real presence. So I mean, Cardinal Supich actually banned Eucharistic processions in Chicago. So that shows how much he supports it. But if they would just go to the Latin Mass, then I think having the Latin Mass and explaining the theology behind it would solve a lot of those problems, honestly. But yeah, I watched that AI bot get destroyed, get embarrassed by an Orthodox priest. It was sad. Look up in your dictionary the word for priestess: a woman who officiates at a non-Christian religion. Regarding Strickland's mea culpa, anyone with goodwill and open eyes should become more radical over time. Ooh, I wonder if I'll get banned for saying that. Francis sends his blessings to the valid illicit mass. Yes, actually, yeah, he supports James Martin, SJ, and all his initiatives regarding LMNOP activity. Now, Francis himself, does he actually support LMNOP marriage? It doesn't seem like it, which is a very not interesting, but a very peculiar contradiction, because he supports basically anyone who he supports now is a supporter of LMNOP activity. Now, it also could be that those people are compromised, and Francis only promotes people who are compromised because he can more easily control them. That was something that was suggested. Actually, Damian Thompson posted an article recently. I don't have it linked. I apologize for that. But if you're on Twitter, find Damian Thompson and look at the article that he linked. Or just Google his name. He posted a lengthy article. It'll catch you up to speed regarding what's going on with the Francis Church, the cover-ups. And he kind of proposes sort of an idea of what he thinks the future will look like regarding a future pope. and it's just really hard to speculate just because you don't know when Francis will die, and I think we've been waiting for it for a while. It hasn't happened. So, um, yeah, Chico Noguchi. Yeah, this was the one. This was the person that had some battles with George Neumeier. It's just so sad that he's gone so soon. I mean, he would have had a field day with the Francis Church within the last few years. Absolute field day with the USCCB, with the Strickland resignation. Man, what good work would have been done. Francis removes Strickland and freedom. Strickland is on the way to St. Strickland, martyred for the faith. Well, I certainly hope he's not martyred. I hope he sticks around longer than George Neumeier. I hope he sticks around for a while so that he can keep firing these strongly worded statements. And, Strickland eventually, it's hard it's hard to predict the future. It's hard. Well, it's hard to predict the future. It's impossible to predict the future. I'm uncomfortable predicting the long-term future. I'm uncomfortable even coming up with predictions because, again, we don't know. For all we know, we could get an African pope. Like within 6 months, we could be talking about a new pope, and it could be an African pope who is certainly. I mean, even the liberal ones are conservative. I mean, it's not. We're not going to get a Pius XIII, but I mean, Cardinal Sarah could be one. Cardinal Sarah could be Pius XIII. He's unlikely to get elected. But Strickland. If things continue down the path that they're on right now, Bishop Strickland, I'm not even going to say radical, but he's going to release increasingly strongly worded statements, and eventually, I think he's going to think talk. I think he's probably going to realize that talk is cheap, and he's going to step up. I'm not saying he's going to be an Archbishop Lefebvre, but he could do something. I mean, he's gonna turn statements into action. He's gonna do something about it. Maybe he'll form his own community, his own underground community, because look, if your bishop authorizes women deacons, anathema. Like, get out of here. Get out of my church, really. R.I.P. George, absolutely. Pray for his soul, really. Francis, the Novus Ordo is the sole expression of the Roman Rite. It is better to close churches and ban the Latin Mass. Novus Ordo implodes on itself. Leo XXIV? Leo the 24th? I thought Leo the 13th was the last Leo. Leo the 13th. Pope Leo the 13th, a lot of people think he should have been a saint. He should be should be canonized. Of course, he could be a saint. We just don't know it. That's possible. Maybe I got the number wrong. I think you added an extra X. Leo the 14th. Yeah. Leo the 13th, though, he came right before Pius X. And man, wouldn't that have been a golden era to live in the Catholic world? In the Catholic faith, you have Pope Leo the 13th and you have Pius X. Man, what a blessing that was. What happened? Modernism happened. And then we get these popes, and we get Benedict, and Benedict was a council liberal. He wore a suit and tie. He was a priest who wore a suit and tie in public. And a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but I've heard that the theory goes that Benedict was a liberal at the council, and his views remained the same over his life, and then he became a conservative. So if his views shifted, the entire view of the church went so far left that he started out as a liberal and became a conservative, even though his views never changed. So that's why, if you take the hardline stance on a lot of theological issues, aren't you just Catholic? Doesn't it make sense? Benedict and John Paul lost all their luster. Okay. Well, Benedict was the Vatican II Pope, and so of course his canonization will be upcoming shortly, right? Because every Vatican II Pope gets canonized and under the new canonization process, of course, which when we finally do get a Catholic Pope, that's going to be reevaluated. It has to be. The canonization process, all of the saints, I think it was after 83, they'll have to they should be required to go through the devil's advocate and get the miracles. Saint Francis, Pope Francis. I think people realize that just because a pope exists doesn't make him automatically a saint. And I think that's becoming very apparent with Pope Francis. Of course, John Paul II traveled the world and he was the rock star pope. And so he showed up to different places where popes never visited and people cheered. And Francis is trying to do that to a certain extent, but he's showing up to like obscure, like middle of nowhere countries, which is fine. It's okay. I'm not. I don't dislike the fact that a pope visits these places. But I think he's showing up to a lot of these places because there's climate conferences. I mean, think about it. I think that's some of his his primary purpose is showing up at a lot of these places like Mongolia. But furthermore, I'd like to see a pope who believes in the Catholic faith and promotes the Catholic faith show up to these places rather than Francis, who shows up and wears Indian headdresses and yeah. So, if whose goal is evangelization, not proselytism, right? Anyway, should a pope stay in the Vatican and clean up the mess in the Vatican? But Pope Francis wants to make a mess, so he has no problem leaving the Vatican and visiting these places. Meanwhile, that's the same thing JP2 did. He made a mess, or he make a mess. Well, he named Bergoglio and McCarrick cardinals in the same consistory, so I would consider that making a mess. But he also had a mess in the Vatican and didn't clean it up. He had Freemasons running some of the departments. Bugnini, I think Bugnini was gone by the time JP2 was Pope. But the discussion, I saw Father Charles Murr, he said that Cardinal Baggio was in charge of the bishop's dicastery or department or whatever it was called at that point. He was basically naming all the bishops in the world, all the new bishops in the world, and he was a Freemason. So Francis going to Indonesia to convert Muslim? Oh boy, I don't think so. Okay. So anyway, that's the end of that. I'm done with the news today, and hopefully I will see you next week. What is next week? Next week is the week of, there's a holy day. Oh, Ascension, of course. Wow, that moved really fast. Easter season moved really fast, didn't it? So we have Ascension Thursday next week, and then a few Sundays, then that'll be Pentecost. So that's really exciting. Okay. So the liturgical seasons move on, and right after Pentecost, don't forget, even if you don't have a accessible Latin Mass, you can still follow the traditional calendar. So immediately after Pentecost, it's Ember Week. So Ember Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. So keep that in mind. And then Corpus Christi is a few Sundays later. So Or, well, I think if you're going really trad, you go Thursday, one of the Thursdays after Pentecost, a few Thursdays after Pentecost. But it can be pushed to a Sunday as well. And there's lots of processions and all that stuff. So until next time, this has been EVTN News. Thank you so much for watching. We are the laity, and we will not be silent.